Hello there, this is Easy3D. This is going to be my first tutorial and it's going to be one on retopology. Now, this is going to take a basic understanding of Maya already to know kind of what I'm talking about certain things. If you get confused about anything, you can ask in the comments. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a cube in the center of the scene, and it's going to then be used to demonstrate this kind of automatic retopology system. It's a node system and it's going to require the Mel script editor in the bottom left, but I'll show you that in a minute. So all I'm doing at the moment is I'm going to create a number of cubes and maybe a cylinder to put on the side, and this is just to combine and then use as a boolean to difference out the center cube and create a bunch of n-gons. N-gons are faces with more than 4 sides, and these are the sort of things that you don't really want in your topology. So I'm creating a kind of mucked up mesh so that we can then demonstrate how amazing this retopology tool is. So I'm just deleting the history on the combination there, and now I'm going to use the Boolean difference and get rid of that. So that will become one mesh, and as you see now, you've kind of got the cutouts of that main cube. So what I'm going to do from here is, well, delete the history just so that Maya knows that it's not doing anything. Actually, first, what I'll do is I'll show you the n-gons, so you can, by cleaning up the mesh, you show all those orange faces there. They're n-gons that now Maya's trying to triangulate and fix, but we'll get rid of that. We'll back out of there, and then we'll edit and delete the history on this. So what we really want to be doing is accessing the Mel script editor in the bottom left there, and what we want to be doing is using that to input these different poly remesh and poly retopo modes. So poly remesh and poly retopo stand for obviously remesh and retopology, and what the remesh does is eventually triangulates your model heavily, fixing any errors with the mesh, as you can see here. It's also, when you move the booleans in a live fashion, moving them around the mesh, you can see it actually adapts dynamically to where the booleans move to as you change them around. This then helps the mesh be corrected before then using the poly retopo node, which then gives you dynamic ability of changing the poly count. And also the poly retopo is really what we're aiming for here, because we want quads. We're not looking for triangles in the mesh, we're looking for quads throughout. So what I'm going to do now is enter the poly retopo command or node, and that should, once Maya loads, it will fix the mesh in a way that manages to create quads throughout. Now, as you can see when I test now, there are no n-gons in the mesh. The mesh is completely fixed, and it's looking great. The one problem we've got is obviously it's got a high poly count now, and often we're going to want to optimize that. This system can be found similarly in places like ZBrush, who's got a similar system. The negatives to an automatic retopology system is obviously that you just have a lot less control over the poly count, but this is something you can fix manually. Now, as you can see here, I'm using the node's features to actually downgrade how many polys it aims for, so you can set the target face count. Its default is set to 2000, but obviously it's a cube with limited detail added to it, so it shouldn't actually need much more than say a couple of hundred. So, and even then you can go quite low. Obviously the lower you go, the kind of less definition you're going to have in those changes, but again, this is the slight lack of control you have by not doing it manually using quad draw, but it's still a great fast way of retopologizing a mesh and fixing any problems you might have. I don't recommend it in a lot of situations, but it's a great thing, and it's something that a lot of people don't know, because obviously it doesn't have a button up there in the toolbars. I'm pretty sure at some point in maybe 2019, 2020 versions of Maya they might be adding this, but obviously not sure. Another way of using this though is actually as a kind of way of smoothing almost, and this wouldn't be something that you can do completely by itself, but with the recently added Mudbox toolset, you actually would be able to create kind of a adaptive ZBrush style painting effect where you can go up and down the poly counts whilst editing a mesh. It's a really useful tool just on its own for this, but it's something that requires a little bit of extra knowledge of where the mesh tools are. So if you bear with me on that, we'll take a look at that now. Okay, so now here what I'm doing is I've got a cube, and I'm just simply retopologizing the mesh without not remeshing it. I haven't done anything to the mesh itself. I've just simply attach the retopo node that I can then access in the attribute editor, and that's attached to the cube. Now I can access the target face count, and you see it's obviously default set to 2000. I can up it to whatever I like, but obviously look, the more you edit these sort of things, the more time Maya has to have a little think. But the reason I'm doing this is to show you how you can kind of use this in a similar way to what you would do with ZBrush, which is you can increase the poly count of Maya to a much higher amount. Now Maya's not so comfortable with these high poly counts, but ZBrush certainly is. But we're not talking in the millions, we're talking in a couple of thousand. What you can then do is you can access the brush tools in the mesh tools, and these are kind of brushes that were originally based in Mudbox, and you can then do things like this, which is curve the corners and soften things. And this is just one application. I'm not going to go into how many different applications the Mudbox brushes allows you to do, but you can see how I'm kind of curving the corners and softening it as almost as though it's some sort of cushion. And this is just something the Retopo thing allows you to do. Now the smooth tool would allow you to do something very similar to this, but the difference would be that you don't have the dynamic ability to then go up and down the poly counts. So from this, even though I have this softened shape, I am actually able to reduce the poly count. Now what I usually do is delete the history in between, just so that Maya doesn't get too confused, so it thinks it's kind of that shape as a kind of default, and then we can access the retopology now and lower the poly count. You see it's actually held its shape pretty well. There's some hardened edge and stuff, but that can either be dealt with by using the different mesh normals and just changing the mesh display to a soften edge sort of system, or playing around with these settings and getting the kind of poly count right so that it still looks relatively smooth on a lower poly count. So these are just the sort of things that this tool can be used for, and I'm barely scratching the surface about what this could be used for. And obviously there is a risk currently, because it's just sitting in the kind of node space and it's not a fully functioning tool. It does risk crashing quite often. The more kind of poly counts you're playing with and different things you do with the booleans can often cause your Maya to crash. So don't complain to me if there's some serious problems. It's kind of it's a test-worthy tool. It's something that you should really practice with, but it's I wouldn't advise it to necessarily use it all the time. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful, and it should have shown you maybe a tool that you haven't seen before, and if you have, that's great. You're ahead of a lot of other people. But yeah, I'll see you in the next video. If you enjoyed this video and if you think it was helpful, please leave a like, and if you want, I'll be releasing more content weekly, so you can subscribe. And if you've got any topics that you want me to cover, any more simple beginner things to cover, then I'll be more than happy to cover those if you leave that in the comments. Right, and see you in the next video.